Aloha mai kako, and welcome back to another book review. I am your host, Mama Kitty, and today we will be reviewing Shift, the second book in Hugh Howey's Silo series. The synopsis is, stop! Before watching this, please be aware. There are likely to be spoilers in this because I am, reviewing this with the assumption that you've read the first book. Well, so, if you get spoiled from this review, don't come crying to me when, whoa, wait! The Goodreads synopsis is as follows. In 2007, the Center for Automation in Nanobiotech, CAN, outlined the hardware and software platform that would one day allow robots smaller than human cells to make medical diagnoses, conduct repairs, and even self-propagate. In the same year, the CBS network re-aired a program about the effects of propranolol? The effects in this propranolol. In the same year, the CBS network re-aired a program about the effects of, forgive my pronunciation, propranolol on sufferers of extreme trauma. A simple pill, it had been discovered, could wipe out the memory of any traumatic event. At almost the same moment in humanity's broad history, mankind had discovered the means for bringing about its utter downfall and the ability to forget it ever happened. So, getting into this, I just want to say, first of all, that this was a bit of a roller coaster from start to finish. I can very confidently say that this was definitely my favorite book of the main trilogy. Functionally, this is a prequel to the first book, one that answers a lot of questions that were brought up for both readers and characters. How did this happen? Why? Did we do it on purpose? Etc. I admit that I was a little confused at first. Wool left us with quite the delicious cliffhanger, ending in Silo 18 with Juliet's return and subsequent, though perhaps unwanted, rise to power. And I was very excited to continue to follow her and Lucas and Peter, right? But instead we start Shift with some random politician named Donald. I was disappointed to say the least, but just let me finish. As I was saying, I was disappointed, but then I realized where they were and what was happening. This random politician was outside. I was hooked from there. I enjoyed watching this guy go about his life, building his political career and working through that career then with his wife, and it was just so different from everything that we had been reading in the first book. And of course, because this is part of the Silo series, there are of course stories interspersed throughout that I'll talk about more later that take place in the Silo, and I very deeply enjoyed watching all of the people who came after this prehistoric politician, if you will. Now, similarly to the first book, this book is also broken up into sections, though this time there are only 3: Legacy, Order, and Pact. But unlike Wool, there was never any one narrator, right? If you remember from my first video, we talked about how for the first several sections, there was one narrator for the whole section before it eventually switched into the every other chapter. In this one, it was usually almost every other chapter, and then sometimes there was like a little clump of chapters that was the same narrator, and then it switched again, and then et cetera, et cetera. It sort of depended on what was happening in either of the simultaneous stories at the time, and then it would sort of, it didn't want to break it up too often because otherwise it would probably get a little confusing timeline-wise. So there were just these little like clusters of information that then would alternate. And within these alternating clusters, Howey is able to very clearly and once again demonstrate his just complete mastery of tone. There was a continued difference in not only characters and locations, but also in age. Some of the alternate chapters, if you will, from like the main storyline, which again I'll get into, take place from like a 16-year-old's point of view, and you get that feeling, right, without it having to be all teen angst and drama. For me personally, 16 is a little bit younger than I may have expected for a book like this. I'm typically like a reader of YA, although I've definitely grown a little bit out of that. But so that kind of, 16 to 18 is kind of what I'm used to, just not in science fiction. But even so, I can say that like Howey writes them really well. You get this very clear picture of this distinction between how a 16-year-old would respond to a revolt versus an adult, right? And you get these different points of views, as well as then like the outside people looking in, and then the after effects and yada yada yada. And it's all just very well done, well structured, I think, in that while it, at least in part of the story, there is sort of the significant time skip, it's all very linear, right? So there's no like jumping around, so you don't really get confused by this particular character's progression through the story. And it's a character that we've already been introduced to, right? It's Solo, who helps Juliet in the first book, and so it's his sort of storyline into who he was and where he's at when he meets Juliet. On this topic of multiple storylines, right, Howey has, I suppose, challenged himself to manage multiple all at the same time throughout the book. There's the main one that, you know, follows from the beginning to the end, although has some significant time skips as well. And when I mean significant time skips, I mean like centuries pass sort of between these different sections, you know, hashtag cryosleep. But alternatively, there are these little mini stories, Solo's backstory being one of them, that corresponds with each section and their theme. I listened to this on audiobook versus reading a hard copy of it, so I wasn't completely cognizant of the fact that it was broken up into these 3 sections, because the audiobook, unlike the first one and unlike what I'm experiencing in the third one, didn't read out when it switched sections. So the middle mini story of the order section of the novel felt really sort of random, just because we never revisited the character that it talks about, and that character is a silo human, and so they're not like a prehistoric person. So it felt a little weird, but like after the fact, I was able to like go back and think about the story and where it was placed within the novel, and I can, you know, and I feel like I say this a lot, but I can now appreciate like why it was put there and what its function was within the theme of the order. And while I say, you know, I feel like I keep saying this idea of hindsight, I do start to get the feeling that Howey's doing it on purpose. It starts to feel like he's turned us into one of his characters, and that he's really trying to let us figure it out along with the people that we're reading about, and experiencing the awe and flabbergastedness of discovering all of the secrets that we do when we discover them. Of course, I can't confirm if it's on purpose or not, but I feel like it's intentional, just because so far it's been very consistent with the in the moment feeling very frustrated or confused, and then coming out the end of the book like, oh, okay, I get it. But that could also just be a me problem. So the pacing in this novel is a little more consistent than the first one, in the sense that the sections don't have any particular drag or slow bits. Again, that middle like mini story was a little out of place at the time, but it wasn't slow. It was actually very interesting, because it was from the point of view of somebody that we hadn't really gotten to see the point of view from, not only as like character wise, because again, this was a brand new character, but also like position wise, right? Like Juliet worked in mechanics, and then she was a sheriff, and then she was outside, and you know, we saw the point of view of the mayor in the first book and the IT head, etc., right? But so this little mini story took place for the point of view of Porter, and so we got that little shift in like power dynamics almost, right? Because Porter's, you know, while not being the bottom of the food chain or anything like that, they're also not particularly powerful in the grand scheme of things. Now, something I realized in the first review, and I want to comment on here, is that I can understand why maybe praising someone on their pacing or their tone may seem like very like bar on the floor praise for an author, right? Because you would think that would be the bare minimum. But I think this kind of control over tone and pacing, when there are different sections that all have their own themes, that then also have these different interwoven stories that all have their own pacing, but are still interwoven together to make this very seamless, very lovely story, almost requires praise, right? Because like not everybody can do that, and Howey just does it so well. It's kind of astounding, honestly. Howey is keeping track of like 4 different stories all at the same time, not to mention the different timelines any one story could be in. And he's doing it masterfully and having to keep them all interesting and relevant throughout, and making sure that he's not missing any details that would then mess up one of the mini stories, or that the mini story doesn't bring up something that doesn't fit with the main story. And it's all these different things that, again, as someone who reads a lot of YA, a lot of the YA authors I read probably could never pull that off. As with Wool, I was just absolutely thrilled with the deepening of the world building and the understanding of how this world got to where it was. One of the things I was very frustrated with, though, was how on point Howey's depiction of human nature was. I'm not going to get into it too much just because I feel like I might say something that I'm not supposed to and end up accidentally spoiling it somewhere. But what I can say is that at a certain point, I acknowledge the fact that we can sit here and talk about what we would do in these character situations all day, every day, but we never really know how we would react until we're in the moment in that kind of situation. So it's hard to criticize, but at the same time, it's just like, ah! Overall, this was another 5 out of 5 stars for me. Again, this was my favorite book in the series, and it was just so much fun. I was constantly running to my phone, texting my friend, again, in all caps, lots of exclamation points, every like 5 seconds. It was probably a little intense from his end, but it was very, very good. I am reading the 3rd book in the series, Dust, and will be reviewing that next. Be sure to subscribe and turn on your notifications so that you get notified when that video comes out. I don't think I'm going to be able to keep up with a book a week, so I'm going to try to hit a week or every 2 weeks for a book or book review to come out, so just make sure to stay tuned. Catch me next time when we review Dust, the 3rd book in the Silo series by Hugh Howey. Until then, you are welcome to join me on Twitch, where I stream every Tuesday through Friday and Sundays, where we can talk about books or tea or cats. But I hope you guys have a tea-filled day, and I will see you all next time. Thank you so much for watching.